Did you get confirmation that we're live? Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started in about 1 minute. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sadi, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Singular. And I'm really excited to introduce our webinar topic and our industry experts who are going to be speaking for us today. We've teamed up with our partners at ironSource to talk to you guys about the 3 steps you need to align your monetization teams and your acquisition teams in order to acquire more high-value users. So we've packed a good amount of content into this 30-minute time slot, but we're working on leaving time at the end so we can take some of your questions. So please go ahead and chat those through as we go throughout the presentation. And yeah, without further ado, I kind of want to introduce our 2 speakers today. So we have on the line Yevgeny Perez. He is the VP of Growth at ironSource, and he oversees all of ironSource's mobile product strategy. And we're really excited to have you on the line today, Yevgeny. Thank you.
Thanks, Adi. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And we also have on the line Liz Lauer-Lopez. She's the Director of International Customer Success here at Singular. And Liz has worked with some really awesome companies, the likes of Robio and Come2Us and Netmarble. And she really partners with them to ensure that they're set up optimally and they're able to leverage Singular's platform and really drive value and growth out of that. So thanks for joining us, Liz.
Definitely. Thanks, Sadi.
Awesome. So before we get into today's topic, we want to give a quick overview of what ironSource and Singular do and who we are. So Yevgeny, could you please introduce ironSource for us?
Sure. So ironSource essentially is focused on building what we call as a growth engine for mobile games, basically supporting the process of taking a game and turning it into a business once the game is ready to be launched. These are some of the partners that use our technology embedded within their games, within their strategy. And this is kind of how the growth engine is fueling the growth of those games. This is the reach of our platform, our basically technologies reaching almost 500 million users on a daily basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and maybe if we go back just 1 slide, Yevgeny. Okay, go for it. There we go. Awesome. Thank you. And Liz, would you mind introducing Singular for us real quick?
Sure thing. So at Singular, we work with top marketers from around the world and across many business verticals, basically helping marketers make smarter decisions. In essence, we're simplifying marketing data, making sure we can automatically connect 3 types of data. The first being campaign spend data, along with user level attribution data and ad monetization data. We're essentially creating a single source of truth across organizations and really helping marketers expose granular insights that they need to drive growth. We currently work with and track over $10 billion on digital marketing spend. So we really get a top-down view of some of the most sophisticated marketers' growth stacks globally. I'm excited to work with some of the biggest names in mobile gaming. We've seen time and again that gaming apps have some of the most progressive growth organizations. These guys are like the early adopters leading the way, and they're constantly testing new strategies to refine their approach. So one thing we're going to talk about today is the shift that we're seeing with gaming publishers really embracing ad monetization and ad revenue generating strategies. This year alone, we've seen 60% more apps monetizing their games using ads. And it's estimated by 2020 that ad monetization revenue will overtake in-app purchase revenue. We're talking about a massive shift in the market with ad monetization set to triple from 72 billion to 201 billion. So I want to kick off talking a little bit about what we've seen with those gaming companies who are continually optimizing their strategies and their structure around growth. Let's dive into how we see those teams typically aligned. Traditionally, you have ad monetization teams focusing on strategies for return and generating the most amount of ad revenue possible. And then you had user acquisition teams focusing on growth, which normally had been measured by ROAS. But with this massive shift in the market and apps quickly adopting ad revenue generating strategies, aligning what I'm calling this dynamic duo is essential to increasing effectiveness for any business's growth. The evolution of this dynamic duo is basically the cross-functional growth team, which is supposed to give us a holistic view of ad monetization and acquisition efforts, kind of creating this growth loop for their business. This combined dynamic duo essentially starts working towards one global KPI, such as true ROAS. And with complete visibility into true ROAS, campaign performance can look completely different. You can identify ad whales that impact your investment decisions. So I'll walk you through a quick example of what we're actually talking about. In this example, if you have day 7 ROAS goal of 15% and you're only using in-app purchase or IAP revenue in your ROAS calculation, your UA manager would divest in this campaign. However, if you end up including ad revenue in your true ROAS calculation, if you just click one more time, we'll see that you get a very different picture of this channel and how this campaign performed. It actually ends up exceeding the target, and you would invest more in this partner. This is exactly what we're talking about today. How do you build these effective growth loops, essentially with data, creating alignment and informed decisions? This translates to revenue and massive growth. So I want to ask actually Yevgeny to take us through the 4 steps that which he can see this happens in.
Thanks, Liz. Sure. So as you mentioned here, this is basically where the market is moving towards when it comes to unifying the growth function into one with a single goal in mind. And before kind of this is even possible to discuss, especially for ad-based games, the main pillar that without it not much can be done would be measurement. And when you think about this this growth loop that Liz mentioned, when you zoom in on that, and this is kind of what is driving this conversation. Once you have your game ready, the product is ready to be launched, it's there. Essentially, your goal would be to start bringing users into the game, to start engaging with it, kind of connecting that market of users with your product. And we've broken it down to 4 steps within the loop, where basically once the product is ready, you start with bringing users into the game, whether you're acquiring them or those users are coming in organically. And that is the first time users are engaging with your product and are kind of coming in and trying it. The second step would be within the game itself, those users, let's say those 1,000 users that came in, the purpose of that product, assuming the purpose here is business, is monetizing those users, whether it's through ads, in-app purchases, subscription model possibly as well. And that step basically is basically as is, based on how your product is designed. The next step, as we see within the product itself, is after those users have engaged with the product, would be how do you analyze their behavior? How do you measure what did they go through in terms of their journey? And how do you create the right optimization insights in order to maximize your LTV? Where essentially the goal of the product itself is to maximize the revenue coming from each user. To close that loop, then the last step, which connects all the measurement points from the top of the funnel, how the users engage with your product, ads, how do they engage with within the product itself. Based on those measurements, how can you optimize marketing and essentially accelerate this loop and make it a profitable business. So this is kind of a high-level perspective on that loop, where at the end of the day, the goal would be maximizing the profit of the business through the right marketing and monetization decisions based on full, true measurement of all the engagements. And when it comes to ads, when you think about the products that show ads within the games, the purpose of those products, and this would be one of our core products, the mediation platform, would be to show the right ad to the right user in order to generate the highest possible yield. So every time the user is engaging with an ad, whether it's a rewarded ad that they're watching a video to revive, or if it's a interstitial or banner, essentially there's a lot of bidders, a lot of platforms that are trying to reach that user, and the highest bidder should win and provide that impression. And each user is going to be generating a different value of revenue based on how much it's worth to the bidding platforms. Though historically it was very hard to make this data actionable. When you think about the ad monetization platforms, this would be just an example of how the data is not actionable historically, where all you see is a lump sum of revenue you generated. And this would be an example, the month of May. You can see the breakdowns between platforms. You can see the breakdowns between countries. But at the end of the day, you don't know who generated how much, where did they come from? Was it their first session, 5th day? Did they spend on in-app purchase as well? You're basically flying blind. And that part of the data, since it's not measured properly historically, is just not actionable. And when it comes to user acquisition for ad-based games, it's a very big challenge to reach a point where you're optimizing towards ROAS, which would be what we can really make it sustainable in terms of the business. And since measurement is not covered in many cases, most teams fall back to what is called retention, or basically based on the average retention curve in a certain market. Let's say it's day 1, 7, 30, 40%, 20%, 10% retention curve, assuming that curve, assuming a certain LTV, which is also kind of an average of that lump sum generated. Some UA teams will be just bidding that basic flat CPI across all channels, which sounds crazy. Some teams that rely on both in-app purchase and ads apply what is called the peanut butter approach, where let's say you have an 80% IP revenue, 20% ad revenues, and you have that full true measurement for your in-app purchases. You would just apply 25% peanut butter on top of that IAP ROAS curves and optimize towards that, even though in reality things behave differently, not necessarily 80-20. Many teams just give up and just exclude their ad revenues when it comes to optimization measurement. Some teams try to hack it themselves within their BI stacks. Many cases end up giving up or trying to iterate to different solutions. And when you try to understand where is this challenge coming from and why was this the case for many years, when you look at the tech stack within the game, essentially you have one main technology embedded within your game that is responsible for measurement and attribution for marketing purposes. So basically, the attribution SDK's purpose is to report back all the in-game events you've configured and in-app purchases, reported back to the attribution platforms, where the attribution platform decide whether it's a new user or not, which channel did it come from, was it a paid organic channel, and if it's not the first time, is it the second day, the 5th session, the day 7 engagement, whatever that is embedded back into the platform, where it's enriched with the data that is including the marketing channel, the creative, the cost, that can be consumed within the attribution platform or within your BI stack, however you would choose to consume it. And basically then the UA team take a look at those measurement insights, make decisions, and optimize the different user acquisition platforms. This does not include ad revenues. So if your business relies on ad revenues, that's a big challenge because historically there's a different technology that takes care of which ad is shown to which user. And that data is just aggregated into one lump sum of a dollar value, just showing you how much revenue you made yesterday. But how do you really make it actionable? And how do you connect that in order to really unlock the capability of true measurement for the full user journey? And when you think about it from the user journey perspective, each user engages differently with the product. It has different engagements with in-app purchases, different ad engagements. Some people watch more ads, some people watch less, different type of ad products. There are different ads served to each user based on the different ad channels that are bidding with that impression. There's a different price for that bid, and essentially there's a different revenue generated by each user, just like for in-app purchases that are measured properly. Same applies to ads. And when you look at that user and you understand that there's a different journey here in terms of measurement around in-app purchase dollars and ad revenue dollars, you tie it to the cost of that user coming from the specific source, specific creative, specific dimension of optimization. Only then you have that full picture. When we started designing the solution for this challenge earlier last year, our main considerations were first and foremost to make it 100% actionable. For this to be actionable, the data needs to be trustworthy, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be in line with what your monetization platform is covering. So if your platform generated $1,000 yesterday, those $1,000 need to be exactly what you're seeing when you're looking at the raw data. This means that if there are discrepancies, you're going to be losing that actionability. We wanted to make sure that there's no friction to the developers. So we wanted this to be a flip of a switch without any integrations to updated SDKs to make sure that there's an easy, streamlined integration to provide that data. The cost of data need to be optimized because we're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of engagements per day per user. So how do you make sure that this is not paid out of another pocket from your budget? And once you have that data in place and it's fully trustworthy, how do you really close the loop on automating your user acquisition? And in order to do that, and having these considerations in mind, what we did was basically unlock the capability of consuming those values of how much revenue was generated and make it actionable within the attribution platforms in order to really make it fully measured and actionable within the marketing platforms. This is kind of the first step around measurement, and on top of that, within the platforms, you can make those decisions based on the combined data, which Liz can share more insights into.
Yeah, thanks, Yevgeny. So step one was all about measuring user revenue behavior and IAPs across what was also generated by ads. I couldn't agree with some of your points more regarding ensuring discrepancies are minimized. So once you're able to track your ad revenue with a partner like ironSource, you need to combine it with your attribution data. So this is where it can get really tricky because we're talking about two different types of data. Like you mentioned, one is, events from the acquisition side, maybe day 7 ROAS, along with user level ad revenue. And to tackle this step, you really should work with an MMP partner who's able to do that data combining of ad revenue and IAP events. But the kind of final piece you see in this calculation on the bottom is the cost part of it. And you need to be able to track the amount of money you spent exactly as you would pay out your media partners. So I want to talk about some considerations and why that piece is so important. So to keep in mind, to measure true ROAS, our overall goal is ensuring that you can identify ad whales. your entire program. And you need kind of 3 parts here: user level ad revenue, user level in-app purchase revenue, and user acquisition costs. These user acquisition costs should be tracked by a partner who can provide API-based integrations across all of your marketing spend. And the reason for that is even the smallest amount of discrepancy, a 1% discrepancy of trying to track costs through tracking links, ends up being an exponential difference and discrepancy in the long term. So it comes down to tracking costs accurately so you don't end up with misinformed decisions. I'm going to then pass it off to Yevgeny now to talk about the last step in the process. Iron being a mediation platform, we want to understand, how do you make decisions and take, how do users take action-based steps in order to look at true ROAS?
Sure. So once we cover that perspective of basically the foundation of full measurement of how much revenue each user generated, how much did that user cost, where did it come from, which actions can you really take based on that? And this is a representation of what we call a Maslow pyramid of kind of what really accelerates your game's growth. And the additional foundation is measurement, which we covered so far. Once that is covered, and only once that is covered, you can truly provide actionable insights within your team and make decisions for the purposes of optimization. And if you're ready, once you're ready, unlock automation on top of that. Couple of examples, things that you can do with the short amount of time that we have. One of the most interesting things that unlock here, once you basically allow for this proper measurement to be available, is how you can fully measure in a cohorted approach your revenue coming from a user. You can see how revenue accumulates over time, the differences between in-app purchases and ad revenue. Can really unlock a true LTV prediction for the first time. And also you can see differences between how different products you have, and even in some cases for the same product, how different geos, how different channels behave differently when it comes to how revenue is accumulated. A good example would be organic users, from what we've seen so far, are less engaged with ads. The acquisition source would have might hint what the average user would behave when it comes to ad engagements, just like within app purchases, because the intent would be different, the context would be different. Connecting that into your own BI stack, this is a Python example of how you can start playing around with the data and building those predictions, whatever approach you're using. But having that available cohorted can really unlock some insights when it comes to LTV prediction, cash flow management, and ROAS optimization. Within the singular platform, this is a good example of how that data is fully translated into this total ROAS approach that combines IAP revenues and ad revenue. You can see that for each game that you have within the singular platform, across the different channels, across the different creatives, different sites, making that full measurement actionable for optimization purposes across all channels, wherever you're buying them, as long as all your users are measured properly and connected to this platform. When you think about optimization, thanks to that data across all your user acquisition channels, kind of the before and after would be, this would be an example of Run Rabbit running a user acquisition campaign across all these different games, where Hit the Clown and Talking Cat are providing these IP performance values. And when you look at the combined IP and ad revenue behavior, you'll see that the ROAS behavior, now that it's fully measured, represents something that you can truly make an optimization decision on. Without it, you're kind of flying blind, like I mentioned earlier. And on top of that data, whether you have your own automation in place, or you are using automation across your user acquisition efforts, this is a good example of, within our platform, how can you optimize towards ROAS, whether you're monetizing with in-app purchases only, have ad revenues only, or you have the combination of both, where basically define that ROAS goal. In this case, it'd be day 7, 2% in the screenshot, and basically turn the autopilot on to hit that goal over time, where automation basically makes those decisions for you in order to hit that ROAS based on that full measurement. To kind of wrap things up, I think that there's a lot of things that can be done on the user acquisition side when the data is connected and measured properly within the product from the ad monetization perspective. There are a lot of things that can be done on the other side as well, based on how the users are engaging with ads, where are they coming from. I kind of mentioned this difference between organics and paid users, where you can essentially use deferred deep linking and segment users based on where they come from, and apply different monetization strategies, different sales, different onboarding practices. Think about someone that is was acquired through a playable ad, where the playable ad is very similar to the tutorial within your game, that you might consider skipping the tutorial within your game based on that acquisition source. Just a couple of examples of how connecting dots on top of full measurement, going deeper into the insights, understanding that full behavior within the loop, and making the optimizations on top of that, where you have that one main goal of maximizing the profit and turning that game into a business. And hopefully that kind of answers some of the questions around how those teams can be combined together and how that growth loop can be accelerated.
Awesome. Well, we're right on time, folks. So I think we do actually have time for questions, which is great. Thank you, Yevgeny and Liz. So I see a few have come in. Let me just get them pulled up. All right. So Yevgeny, I think this one would be great for you to answer. Can you give some examples of some steps that monetization teams on that side of this equation, the monetization teams can use those UA insights around maybe true ROAS to accelerate and optimize for ad revenue and accelerate growth?
Sure. So one of the things that kind of unlock growth when it comes to monetization is once those users are coming in, so whether it's their first time or you already have some data about those users based on prior engagement within the game, is how do you treat those users, and how do you get to a point where essentially you personalize the user journey within the product. And one of the interesting parts here with this approach is that even if it's the first time you're seeing a user, based on some historical data from your first step ones, basically, and once you see how a couple of thousand users engage with the product, and you can see that a certain creative, a certain channel is driving a certain intent, a certain user engagement, if you're able to connect that insight and productize it, and the examples I gave would be around skipping the tutorial, the first time user experience, or just segmenting the users based on the acquisition source. So for example, if you're acquiring users, you acquire that specific user from an offer wall, that means that this specific user is knowledgeable enough to understand what an offer wall is, and can now also engage with an offer wall within your game itself, find the right way to promote that ad product for that specific user, knowing that he already knows, he or she, that this is an alternative payment and they can actually generate revenue and value from that. And that's just one example, but mostly it's around segmentation, whether it's new users or users that are coming back. I think another good example would be understanding the in-app purchase behavior based on the ad behavior, ad engagements, showing that, for example, proving that IP values can go up based on the engagement with rewarded products, which increases retention, increases engagement, and eventually will also increase monetization. So that's another thing that can be utilized here.
All right, that is great. We have two more. I don't know if we have time for both, but we will be we do promise to follow up or have our industry experts follow up to answer these questions. But Liz, I think maybe you can take this one. This is about how do I acquire more ad whales with user level and true user level ad revenue and true ROAS measurement.
Sure. I think one of the key things that Yevgeny hit on pretty well is just, these, the whole point of, our discussion today is to kind of highlight that these two data sets, right, haven't been combined before. And so through combining these data sets, you are basically getting more granular insights and understanding where these ad whales are coming from. Through understanding where these ad whales are coming from and their demographics, that will allow you to leverage that data, that kind of those data points in order to either build lookalike models or re-engage those ad whales. We have there's a lot of creative things that can be done, such as putting time and efforts and also marketing budget against making sure that you're engaging those ad whales based on their interests and their needs.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you so much, Liz. So we're right at 9:30. As promised, we will be following up with both the recording for this webinar. And if you have friends who kind of want to listen in too, they can still definitely register and get that on-demand recording. We'll also follow up with some awesome questions that we got that we didn't have time for. But thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys have a great day and that this was insightful. Take care.